Right, let me set this up. It's been a while since we've done a fail focus, and I wanted to bring this to you for a while now. Today, we're going to talk about Janine's unfortunate failed part 3. This has been Janine's second attempt at part 3, and she took her pupil Izzy to the test with her, and during that session they were going to be working on planning, awareness and anticipation. Izzy has had a whole bunch of hours, quite a lot of hours, and Janine had identified that Izzy's learning need was more to do with her forward planning, her ability to anticipate and predict what's going to happen next, and as a result make an appropriate plan for it. As we've done before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about Janine's thoughts on what happened. We'll talk about the examiner's feedback, and we're going to look at the areas with which Janine has lost significant points on the Part 3 scoring system. That's going to be anything that she scored a 0 or a 1 on, and we're also going to look at the risk management. So when I spoke to Janine, I asked her what she felt had gone on, and she felt that she had started strongly and that things were going reasonably well, that the pupil had a couple of faults in her, but she felt that she had been managing the lesson and controlling the environment and responding to the pupil's needs and adapting where necessary. Now, I actually attended the Part 3 test. I didn't go in the car, but I was at the test center. I attended with Janine, and so I know exactly what was going on in the moments after the examiner had left the car and Janine was waiting for that feedback. When I asked Janine what was going on, she said to me that she wasn't sure. She said it could go either way. When I asked Janine, well, tell me what happened, she said to me that she felt like the session had started off well. We got off reasonably positively. The pupil had a couple of errors in her locker, and Janine felt that she was responding to those errors and adapting and adjusting and addressing those faults in a way that seemed relatively acceptable to her. It felt okay, and she felt like the session had started fairly well. But then there were a few moments where things got a bit hairy and she wasn't entirely sure, and I asked her specifically, what happened? Tell me the scenarios. I might be able to offer some insight. Now, when a PDI says to me, oh, I'm not sure, it could go either way, and I don't know if a certain scenario was safety critical or not, that's always a little bit alarming to me, because it was either that it wasn't a big deal and the PDI is maybe overthinking it, which I'm okay with, it's a stressful situation, or it's that there was indeed a safety critical situation and the PDI is not truly in tune with the fact that they have just been involved in a safety critical situation. That is what concerns me. And here's what the examiner had to say. The examiner told us that the feedback was going to be split in 2 halves. He said the session started off well. He felt like Janine was fairly in tune with the pupil. Janine had a pleasant rapport with the pupil. Janine was asking some good questions. He actually, the phrase he used, which I really liked, was, you were pushing thought before it happened. So there were scenarios imminently unfolding, and Janine was asking questions that would push thought in the pupil before the scenario has unfolded and we've lost control. He said that she responded well to small errors, she made small corrections and adjustments, and there was a good vibe about the lesson in the first 15 minutes. In fact, the examiner had mentioned that he felt that this was really positive. So there's some nice stuff in there. But then we have to look at the other half of the feedback. Colin told Janine that the session has had to result in an automatic fail because of a situation involving risk around a cyclist. The examiner said there was a poor balance of shared responsibility, and as a result of that poor balance, there was a high-risk situation involving a cyclist, and as a result, 2 other road users were affected. And unfortunately, the examiner concluded that the lesson was not then adapted effectively to ensure that learning took place from that safety critical situation. Examiner actually said when the safety critical situation occurred, he was still in 2 minds about this could possibly still be salvaged if we can get control and ensure that the rest of the lesson really tackles what has gone wrong here, and improves on the pupil's ability to understand what went wrong, why it happened, and what we're going to do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, we didn't go and work on those things at all. The lesson carried on, almost as if the safety critical situation never occurred. So here's what bothers me about that feedback. Janine didn't appear to really understand that there had been safety critical situations involving a cyclist and impacting 2 other road users. In the moments after the exam, when I asked her, what happened? Tell me your thoughts. Let's talk about it. She didn't seem to have any sense of the severity of that scenario. That's what alarms me. That's what concerns me, is Janine needs to know when we are in a safety critical situation. And so it's very clear to me that Janine probably needs to spend a little bit of time understanding what constitutes as a safety critical situation, so that she can work on avoiding these situations, but also so that when they do occur, she can offer the appropriate level of response. So what actually happened? Well, when we talked about this further, it became very obvious to me what happened and how it had occurred. Janine and Izzy were in a situation where they were approaching a roundabout, and ahead of us, to the side of our lane, was a cyclist. And they were approaching this roundabout, but they were also subsequently approaching the cyclist. Janine saw the cyclist. Janine was aware of the roundabout. And Janine tried to coach the pupil in a way that would encourage the pupil to contribute to thought before the situation unfolded. Here's the critical issue. When Janine asked the pupil a planning and awareness question, something along the lines of, how is that cyclist going to affect our journey? The pupil didn't respond. The pupil said nothing. And Janine waited and waited, and the pupil didn't give Janine any kind of a response. And before we knew it, we were arriving right on the heels of the cyclist. And then before you knew it, you had to move away from the cyclist. And before you knew it, there were other road users around us that we clearly were not aware of and responding to appropriately. So it sounded to me as if Janine had been trying to coach the pupil did not respond, and then we both went quiet. Janine's waiting for something from the pupil is probably waiting for something from Janine because she doesn't have the answer. This is the moment where Janine has to adapt. This is the moment where Janine has to change the roles. You have a very small amount of time in these moments. What Janine needed to do was jump in, change the roles, tell the pupil what to do. So this is a very typical control and then educate. Pupil's not giving me what I want. I need to control this situation. I'm going to tell the pupil what we need, and then we're going to educate the pupil later. Because right now we don't have the time to educate. Right now, we're right on the heel of this cyclist, and there's vehicles next to us in the lane to our right, and we're not doing anything about any of that. So control the situation. Janine should have changed the roles. She should have told the pupil, this is what I want. This is when I want it. This is what you're going to do. Get control, manage the risk, get us out of the scenario, and then let's talk about that when we're out of the situation. But instead, everybody went silent. And then when we were inappropriately positioned to the cyclist, the pupil tried moving out of the way, and we've now moved into the path of other road users in other lanes. And it became very safety critical, and it became very dangerous very quickly. Let's look at the scores that Janine got. So I'm looking for the risk section of the Part 3 test. I'm looking at areas where we scored 1 or less. Now, when it comes to lesson planning, Janine scored 5 overall. 3 of the 4 competencies in lesson planning, she got a 1. So that is, did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? Was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? And was the lesson plan adapted, when appropriate, to help the pupil work towards their learning goals? She got 1s on all 3 of those. And I hope that you guys can see how an inability to respond to the pupil's inability to take action has resulted in the examiner concluding that Janine did not identify the pupil's learning goals and needs, did not respond to these safety critical situations, and as a result, the structure was not appropriate. We did not respond to what the pupil was showing us that they needed from that lesson. And then the lesson was not adapted suitably when appropriate to help the pupil work towards that situation. So when the pupil was unable to handle that situation, when the pupil was not responding to Janine's questions, Janine needed to adapt, control, and then educate later. Unfortunately, I think Janine's trying to do all of the education even when the pupil is not giving her any response. And we're allowing that situation to unfold and unravel dangerously. Risk management, Janine unfortunately got a 7, so as we know, it's an automatic fail. And she got 1s on 3 of the 5 competencies. That is, did the trainer ensure that the pupil fully understood how responsibility for risk would be shared? I hope that that's probably self-explanatory. Was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? So the trainer's inability to respond and take action when it really mattered, and to be aware of the road users around us when we're trying to move away from that cyclist, and the effect that we had on those road users, as well as the cyclist, is going to result in Janine scoring very low on this competency. And was any verbal or physical intervention by the trainer timely and appropriate? Again, Janine should have jumped in, she should have changed the roles, she should have controlled the situation and then educated later. So there wasn't an appropriate physical or verbal intervention from Janine when it really mattered. And that is why she has had an automatic fail within risk management. Now, teaching and learning strategies, Janine scored a 14. And I would argue that this has actually been the section where she scored most positively. She got the most 2s and 3s in this section. She got a 1 in 3 sections despite that. That was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability? Was the pupil encouraged to analyze problems and take responsibility for the learning? And were opportunities and examples used to clarify learning outcomes? So I said to you after the safety critical situation occurred, we didn't really address it. We kind of just went off and carried on. You can see how that's going to affect her score under were opportunities and examples used to clarify learning outcomes. And was the pupil encouraged to analyze problems and take responsibility for their learning? So I hope that that's clear. I'm sorry, Janine, that it hasn't worked, but there is good news here. We have a clear sense of what you're going to work on. You're going to work on understanding safety critical moments better and controlling before you educate. Yes, of course, we want to push thought before a situation happens. We want to coach the pupil so that they can take some responsibility for that situation. But if it's not happening, there comes a time where it's like, I just got to take over. Control, we'll educate later. That's what I want you to go and work on. I want you to control situations, stop situations from becoming safety critical. And if that means changing the roles and talking and analyzing and reflecting and learning on it later, I'm okay with that. Just don't let things get dangerous.